Well. As I was recording content about all the craziness that's going on with Furia, we had Astralis make a big announcement today, and that's after failing to qualify for their, I think, fifth major in a row now, if I'm not mistaken, and after just generally having a really tough year, and generally speaking, the cadiaN IGL experiment has not really worked out, as we'll talk about a little bit more. They have decided to make a move, which is going to go into effect pretty much immediately. Their next tournament is supposed to be the PGL Astana event, and they are going to have a new in-game leader at that event, and that's going to be HooXi in for cadiaN. And so let's go ahead and talk about this move a little bit, shall we? If you don't mind, though, before I start digging into this, go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. What are you doing? You know, you like the content here, you're watching this video, go ahead and subscribe. Helps me out. Maybe leave a comment, maybe leave a like. Just, I'm trying to grow the channel here little by little. We've made a lot of progress so far this year. Looking to just kind of keep that going. I'm making content when I can. I know that sometimes I'm traveling a lot for analyst work, which is a good thing for me and for you and for everyone, I think. Hopefully you guys are enjoying that. But I try to do content when I can here, so if you want to support the channel, I would appreciate that. But what has Astralis been like with cadiaN? Well, it's been kind of a tough one. In fact, I would say they have only had one successful thing happen with cadiaN as the IGL of this team, and that is when they placed top 4 at the Blast World Final just before the Shanghai Major to end 2024. They were able to beat Na'Vi in a best-of-3, beat Mousesports in a best-of-3 to get a top 4 finish there, and that was definitely an impressive result. It looked really cool, especially after they looked so poor at the Blast Fall Final, which we remember the whole weird situation where they pulled some shenanigans to be able to bring in a substitute and yada, yada, yada. cadiaN probably shouldn't have even legitimately, under the rules, been able to IGL at that tournament, but he does. He makes his big debut there, and their first map is an 0-13 loss to Vitality on Inferno. And then they didn't do much better on the second map. They lost DusT 4-13, so 4 total rounds in 2 maps to go 0-2 to kick off their debut. And then while they took a map off of Spirit, they still ultimately went out very quickly at that Last Fall Final, going 0-2 to Vitality and Spirit. Then at Rio, while they had a best-of-1 victory over Eternal Fire, which is, of course, now Aurora, they lost to Heroic and they lost to VP in best-of-3s, going 0-2 in both of those series to, fall pretty early in that tournament. They had the high mark at the Blast World Finals I was talking about, but when they went to the European RMR, they, of course, had to use Bro instead of Device, which I'm not going to blame like Astralis and cadiaN and the players for that one. That is a very tough situation. The device health issue has been a persistent one over the years, and it's a really difficult subject to really break down and take a side on. So I'm not really going to look into that one too much with the whole European RMR aspect there and not qualifying for the Shanghai Major. I'm not giving a full pass, but I can kind of see it. You know what I mean? I get it. They even had a couple of cool wins over Eternal Fire and Bait at that tournament, but lost the opening best-of-1s to Nine Pandas and Sashi, and then ultimately lost to Passion UA, who were kind of on a heater at that tournament, had a big moment, like Jumbo, obviously now moving on to technically a bigger team. Jack Cosmo, great player there. Fear, great player there. So that was a cool team. So I'm not really going to harp on that one too much. And you know what? Even this whole not qualifying for the Austin Major, losing in the European MRQ online to OG, Metasport, and Bait, it is an online thing. I don't know if it would have mattered, though. As bad as they were playing, I think some of these teams could have beat them on land, too. So, yeah, they haven't qualified their last 5 majors in a row. Maybe you give them a little bit of leeway on a couple of them, but still, just not a good situation. And really, if you just look at this whole entire year, it's not been good, because Katowice, they fell out very early. They opened things in the play-in with the loss to Bait in Brazil, only beat FlyQuest and Pain to move on, which, whenever Pain's pretty legit, I'll give them credit for that one. That's solid. But then they got blasted by Spirit in their opening match in the main event, which Spirit's a better team than them. I expect Spirit to win that game, but you got to at least be competitive. Those matches weren't even close to competitive. Then after beating Furia, they got blasted by Gamer Legion. And again, Gamer Legion's a pretty good squad, good players. PR's definitely been big for them. Rez has been big for them. Slin's still a great opper. The ZTR Ash Brain Trust is doing pretty good. And just generally speaking, they have a pretty good little project going on over there. But again, it's the fact that they're not even competitive in those 2 maps. They're the bigger problem than the actual loss itself, right? Then you go to Cluj, and they actually placed 3rd. So I was maybe a bit mistaken whenever earlier I said their only good finish was the Blast World Final top 4. They came 3rd at Cluj-Napoca, and they did so by winning best-of-3s over Made in Brazil, Big, and Mongols after losing their opening series to Pain and Falcons, which the win over Mongols is definitely legit. Got to give them huge credit for that one. they took Mouse to 3 maps, who ultimately won the tournament, and then they beat FaZe in a third place decider. So I'll say, you know what? Not too shabby on that one. I'll give them some credit for that one. Looked pretty good. But then their last couple of events, Blast Open Lisbon, they go out in dead last place. They 0-2 Vitality, 0-2 FaZe, and fair enough on Vitality, but they only scored 4 to 7 rounds each map they played that tournament. At least be competitive when you're playing against FaZe, a team that you had just beaten the tournament prior. At least be competitive against Vitality if you're going to lose. I know they're the best team in the world right now, but again, when you're only getting 4 to 7 rounds a map, it's just like, yeah, I got to harp on you, even if it is like to the best team in the world, right? Then you go to PGL Bucharest, and while they did beat FaZe in the opening series, they lose to 3D Max and Apogee, which 3D Max is kind of a legit team. They just don't have as much firepower as I would like, but they're a well-run team with Maka. Body actually has been a good entry fragger for them. So, you know, and that went all 3 maps. Okay. But then losing to Apogee, come on now. I know Apogee, you know, had some cool fast tactics and did have some cool firepower with Jacob, and their Hyper Hypex pretty solid as well. Like they had some good stuff. Like they're not a terrible team by any means, but it's LAN. They had zero experience of it. You have tenured veterans who have been doing this for a long time. You're supposed to have your own very talented players, and you lose to them 0-2. Give me a break. This can't be happening in a best of 3 on LAN if you're trying to do something with this team. And then, yes, they beat Legacy. Okay, but then they lose to Virtus Pro, and that's a team that I think is very beatable. So, all in all, it's just the results just aren't there. Again, top 4 at Blast World Final last year, 3rd at Cluj-Napoca this year. Those are the only 2 results worth mentioning. Anything other than that was either last place or at best like 9th to 12th place. And so that's just not where you want to be if you're Astralis. Obviously, you're looking to be a top team in the world. Again, missing all these majors in a row, definitely don't want that. You gotta make a change. Right. I mean, that's just, it is what it is. And also, I think the other big naming thing besides results is just their map pool very much lacked. Like, they were terrible on DusT 2. 1-11 record on DusT 2. And most of them, they weren't even competitive. So, no DusT 2, and they don't play Anubis. So that's basically, of your 7 map pool, that's 2 maps that are dead, right? One's a permaban, okay, but DusT 2, literally not competitive at all on the map. Train, 1-3 record. Most of their losses were not competitive at all. They had the 1 win over FaZe. So, don't have that map. Mirage, 3-8 record. Okay. Quite literally the only maps that I felt good about them on were their Inferno was generally pretty good with this 5. Like, I liked how they played Inferno, and they had some results on it against some good teams. They beat FaZe, beat Mongols, had a good overall record. I'll give them some credit on that one. Ancient at times looked okay for them. They beat FaZe on it a couple of times, beat Falcons. You know, had a win over 3D Max, you know, 8-6 record. It was okay. You know, I'll give them a little bit of credit for that one. Nuke, though, 7-5 record. Most of their losses were blowouts, and their only wins were to like Saw and Made in Brazil and Furia, which were all struggling teams. Mouse was the only legit good win they got on Nuke, I felt like, this year. So some issues there in the map pool as well. And then just erratic player performances. cadiaN struggled as a performer individually as a rifling IGL. And maybe that was asking too much of himself, being an opper for so long and trying to be a primary rifler. I get why he did it, though. When you have DusT on the team as the best Danish opper you got right now, and a guy that was one of the best players in the world in CSGO for many years, and before the health issues was one of the best oppers out there. So it made sense in that regard. And I almost respect cadiaN. I do respect cadiaN for being willing to sacrifice being an opper and trying to be a rifling IGL to allow DusT to be the primary opper of this team and just kind of do what you can. Like, I can give him some credit for that. But he was pretty much one of the lowest fragging IGLs of 2025 in the back half of 2024. I mean, he was about as bad as it gets as far as just individual performance compared to other IGLs. And I'll tell you this, a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, HooXi is coming in, and was obviously a terrible fragger in 2024 with G2, and that's part of the reason why I got cut from that team. Well, cadiaN is playing pretty much just as bad as HooXi was in that same time period against a similar level of competition. So it's just not a good look, and I'm not expecting you to be like a crazy fragger. Again, there are some IGLs out there like Alexi B and Kerrigan and so on who themselves are not very good fragging IGLs, but are just such good IGLs that you can kind of forgive the fact that they're not fragging at a very high level. It's very rare to have high fragging IGLs. We only have a handful of them in the scene. So I'm not expecting to be a star player, but it's just sometimes you can't be like a full-on burden either. Then Stown is a mystery to me because in the past, this dude was a star of Heroic for like 2 years, 2022 and 2023, right? Then last year, he was kind of on and off, if I'm honest. And this year, while he did play pretty well at Bucharest and Cluj and played well in the online MRQ, he absolutely struggled at Blast Lisbon, Katowice, Shanghai, and so on. Like, he has just not been the star rifler that this team expects. And how much of it is him? How much of it is the IGLing and the environment? The coaching, like, I can't know all of these things. You know, obviously, Stown has to take a good bit of responsibility for not performing better, but there's obviously other factors that could be going on here, so I'm not really sure what's going on. I just know that it's a problem because this team didn't have any consistent stars or firepower. And you combine that with their lack of a map pool, and you see why the results are happening the way that they are. Then Yabby, there was a monster at Cluj-Napoca this year when they finished third there, but outside of that, he has really struggled, and that was despite having a pretty solid 2024 and being a pretty solid, you know, kind of sidekick to Stound in 2023 on Heroic as well. So obviously there was the whole Stound and Yabby wanting to get rid of cadiaN from Heroic, and that, you know, cadiaN going to Liquid and that faltering, and then there's all kind of weird things behind the scenes I'll never truly understand or know, and so I don't want to claim to be an expert there, but it is just weird to me that, dude, outside of Stair, it's just like this team didn't really have much going for him. Like, I thought Stair was a good entry rifler. I thought he was. And I hope that he gets utilized well with HooXi, and he could be a nice pillar of this team going forward. Device is still solid as an opper. I think he still has a chance to, you know, kind of rekindle something. I just don't think the type of player he is fit the type of style that cadiaN like to play. Obviously, cadiaN as a tactician, love or hate him, you know, critique him what you want. The guy likes to play an up-tempo, fast-paced, very chaotic T-side. He likes to, you know, have an earlier AF emphasis. He likes to, you know, overstack. He likes to maybe individually do some, like, crazy aggro lurks while his team's doing other things. He just has this, which can be unpredictable and wild, and if you react well enough together as a team and you're on the same page and your spacing and trading efficiency is right, you can make a playstyle like that work. It's not that it's just completely unfounded and completely terrible, but I just don't think it's a style that really suited Device. And while certainly Yabby and Stown were used to playing with cadiaN with that type of style when they were on Heroic together for those years, it just wasn't working out this time around for whatever reason. I don't really know why. You know, like, again, there's behind-the-scenes stuff I won't understand, and I'm not going to try to delve into that. But the reality is, team wasn't performing well. They weren't getting results. Map pool wasn't good. cadiaN was struggling as a fragger. Really, everyone was struggling as a fragger, except for Stair within his role as an entry rifler. I thought was still playing pretty well. And then Device was generally pretty solid. But the performances from Stown and Yabby were just too erratic. You know, like, they'd have good events, yes, but they're just too on and off. Nothing consistent there. It means this team can't really function when you don't have stars, a map pool, and you're just having the struggles that you're having. So with the move now, we have HooXi coming in. Obviously, HooXi has been out of action since the middle of 2024 when he was removed from G2. Let's get the elephant out of the room. He himself is also a very weak fragging IGL, so they're not going to make really any strides in that direction. Similarly to G2 not making any strides in that direction with Snacks, because he's also a weak fragging IGL, and not that great of an IGL, in my opinion. We already talked about that, though. So we know that, right? And the knock for him has always been that, is an IGL who is that weak of a fragger really worthy of leading a team that has aspirations to be a top 5 team in the world and a consistent contender? And that was always a debate with him being removed from G2 when they did, because it was very damning that the team was able to win without him at Dallas. And when they did cut him, that team also went on to win the Blast Fall Final and the Blast World Final. And they looked like a better team. Now, how much of that was Snacks being a better IGL than HooXi? Doubtful. I think a lot of it had to do more with just the amount of firepower that they gained. People forget the other side of that. Yeah, they replaced HooXi with Snacks, but guess what else they did? They got freaking Malbs, who was a rock star rifler next to Nico. And then you have Munacy, obviously the best opper in the world last year for the most part. So it's just like that combination of factors is just as important as the HooXi drop, let's just say. Now, he did have his high marks too, HooXi. I mean, he did, while he didn't really have the wins in 2024, he had a couple top 4 finishes at Chengdu in the Copenhagen Major. Obviously, the year prior to that, he had helped them win Cologne and Katowice in 2023 and had some other top 4 and top 8 finishes. Did struggle at the last Paris Major, though. I think that was a really damning result. And when he first got picked up by G2 in 2022, he helped them win the Blast World Final and had a top 4 EPL and some other results. So I don't think he got G2 as many wins as they were hoping for or what they expected with the talent that they had, particularly the 2024 lineup that, had m0NESY and Nico that he was IGLing. But again, that addition of Malbs was just bonkers as well. Like, I do wonder if HooXi would have had, if you would have had the lineup, HooXi, Malbs, m0NESY, Nico, Hunter, I think that team gets all the wins they still did if they got with Snacks. Like, I just think they still, unless there was like some clashing between HooXi and Nico's calling and that like ruined their mid-rounding and second voice situation somehow, I just feel like you probably would have gotten a similar situation there, and maybe things would be looked at a lot differently about HooXi and G2 if that would have happened. Then there's the whole situation of like when they decided to root JKS, bringing in Nexa, like all these other roster moves that kind of surrounded the team when HooXi was the IGL of the squad. It is what it is. But yes, he was seen as a weaker fragging IGL. And I think the trade-off is like, okay, we can forgive low fragging IGLs if you're a really elite IGL. And that's why people, are where they're at with people like cadiaN and Alexi B. But you just weren't putting HooXi in that same class of caller as a cadiaN or Alexi B. I think that's really the big issue here. And then I think IGLs like cadiaN, Chopper, some of these other guys were having more success and they were better fraggers than HooXi. Not immediately. I mean, Chopper had been doing it with Spirit, though, for a bit, and then cadiaN did eventually do it with Heroic, kind of the back half of 2024. Then, obviously, guys like Apex, Blitz, Brolin, definitely better fraggers and definitely have more success calling. Although Brolin is very early in those days, so, the sample size is quite small. So, here's the difference, though, is if you thought that HooXi wasn't a good enough IGL for G2 at the time because G2 had aspirations to be a top 5 team and be a consistent contender, and you felt like HooXi was too much of a fragging burden and not as good of a caller as names like cadiaN and Alexi B, okay, that's a debate you could have. But Astralis is in a rough spot. They're 15th in the world right now. They're nowhere near being at the level that G2 was at the time that HooXi got removed. They need to try something, and there's not many Danish options left. The only thing that you could have done besides this is Glaive from Ents, I guess, would have really been the only other option that would have made sense here instead of HooXi. Like, I could have seen that as maybe a better option. Other than that, though, I don't really know. I know there's crizN on OG, but you wouldn't be able to get him until after the major. So I don't know if that was an option. Maybe that's an option they will still look at after the major is over, or depending how things play out with HooXi throughout the course of this year. And then, what do you resurrect an MSL from the dead like a necromancer? Like, I just don't really know like what Danish IGL options are really left at this point. I'm not going to pretend like I know of any of the up and coming Danish IGLs that are out there. I mean, I've heard some names, but it's just like, I don't know, like Iceberg from Sashi or something like that. I don't really know what other options are out there is kind of what I'm getting at. So that's kind of where I'm at in that regard. And also, here's the thing, like, HooXi's IGLing with G2 for the 2023 year and through a lot of 2024 was kind of when I was just getting back into Counter-Strike as an analyst. And so I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert enough on how good HooXi is as a tactician to really know. But it's one of those situations where Astralis are in such a bad spot that you got to try something. And you got to feel like HooXi might be able to help, even if just the environment's better. And you get like the honeymoon phase going. And, maybe he's able to have better relationships with some of the players and maybe find ways to use them better. Even if their tactics aren't amazing. If you can just do basic fundamentals and, build a foundation, find ways to get down and be more comfortable, find a way to really take someone like Stair, just continue to help him blossom, this team should do better than what they were doing recently. I mean, it can't get much worse, is I guess the point I'm trying to get at. Like, when you're already kind of placing dead last or close to it at most events, you're not making the last multiple majors in a row, like, you can't really go downward anymore. So it's just like, I don't know what other options they had other than like an Iceberg or a, Glaive, and obviously Snappy ship's already sailed. He's on NIP. And then Krizen's on OG going to a major. So it's just like, I don't really know the options they had. As far as like, will this team do better? Again, I can't see them doing much worse. It can only get better from here, I would think, or it's just going to stay the same, and in which case they might have to look at further changes down the line. Other than that, you're eventually just have to go international like Furia just did. But I just don't know if Astralis is willing to do that because of them being that Danish brand, that's very core to them. And so I don't really know, how that plays out. So anyway, that's kind of my take on the situation. Wish them all the best, I guess, but it's going to be a tough climb back up. And, there's obviously some things behind the scenes that I'll probably never know about why things didn't work out better. There were flashes of brilliance at times from Astralis, like at Cluj and like at that last World Final, but nothing ever consistent, nothing ever really enough to want to keep continuing with the project as is without changes. They had plenty of time together, over 6 months at this point, and, it definitely made sense to make some sort of change. Was this the right change? I don't know. I don't know what other options were out there, what was explored, and maybe they did offer other people and they got turned down. I don't know. Maybe people are just like, I don't want to go over there. It just, maybe it's not a good situation. Obviously Glaive's already been there, so he kind of already knows what the situation is there, for example. And yeah, so that's that. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, all that jazz. Appreciate you so much. Catch you on the next one.